Super. Okay, so I just wanted to start by first of all thanking everybody for coming. And I wanted to share a story. My sister-in-law brought me this book, which is really beautiful. And a story in it that I read, I think about it literally every single day. So I wanted to share it with all of you. And I think it's just a good introduction for what we're all here for. On a trip to America, a secular Israeli family of 5 was enjoying a day's outing together. The pleasant experience turned suddenly into tragedy as the car swerved off the road and careened down a steep incline. The battered vehicle caught on a boulder. Realizing that she was still alive, the mother ignored her own wounds in an attempt to save her family. Miraculously, she was somehow able to pull her children out of the wreckage, and they all survived. Her husband's body, however, appeared lifeless. Eventually, help was summoned, and the family was transported to the hospital. It was there that the woman's fears were confirmed. Her husband had not survived. Upon hearing the news, she fainted. When she came to, the mother was able to reflect on the recent tragedy. At the same time that she felt devastation for her loss, she was aware of the fact that she and her children experienced a miracle by surviving the accident and emerging relatively unscathed. Her mind was made up. She had witnessed the Yad Hashem firsthand. It was time for the family to become observant. Upon returning to Israel, the family started life anew. Taking up residence in Bnei Brak, the mother enrolled her children in Cheder and Beis Yaakov. While the longing for their Abba was still present, they found that they were able to carry on. The children progressed nicely in their studies. Still, the late start became a challenge. One night, the eldest son came sobbing to his mother. A Gemara test was scheduled for the next day, and the distraught boy felt that he was not up to par with the rest of the class. We're learning Shor Shenagach Es HaPara, the 5th chapter of Baba Kama, he cried to his mother. The whole class knows it, except for me. There's no way I can pass. Trying to offer reassurance, his mother sat up with him. The boy eventually drifted to sleep despite his tears. In the morning, the boy was a different person. He seemed content and assured. What's come over you? His mother asked. Oh, don't worry, Ima. I know the Gemara just fine, he replied. The mother cast a puzzled glance at her confident child. But you cried yourself to sleep last night, telling me that you don't know the material like the other boys, she explained. Right, he answered his mother, but now I know the Gemara. Now his mother was really confused.
So
what was her son talking about?
You have to go to the basement.
She blurted out.
I don't want to get in the living room.
Came the reply. The perplexed mother could restrain herself no longer. Please, tell me what you're talking about. The boy replied, last night, Abba appeared to me in a dream. Abba, did you know that we became religious? I asked him. Yes, my son, I know, he said. And did you know that I'm learning Gemara? Yes, my son, I know that as well. How do you know all this, Abba? You see, when you and the family became Baalei Tshuva, they allowed me to enter Gan Eden, even though I had been devoid of merit. And not only that, but whatever you learn down on earth, they teach me the same Gemara in heaven. You're learning Shor Shenagach Es HaPara, aren't you? That's right, Abba. But the problem is, we have a test tomorrow. All the other kids know the material, but I'm still behind. If you have been learning it also, could you teach it to me? Of course, my son. And so Abba taught me all the parts I did not know. So now I'm completely prepared for the test, the boy concluded his tale. Although relieved that he was in better spirits, the mother did not know what to think. Yet if she needed any confirmation to dispel her lingering doubts, it came a few days later. The smiling boy had gotten his test back and proudly displayed his mark to his mother. 100. With the knowledge that we are still providing for our loved ones, granting them merit and pleasure, we can retain a connection and a sense of closeness with them. And until such time as we are ultimately reunited with our loved ones, we can take comfort from the fact that they benefit from and share in our fulfillment of mitzvot and our Torah study. Somewhere in heaven, they could be learning the same Mishnah. So that's kind of the impetus for tonight and why this was the idea of what we should do. Le'ilai Nishmas Tati, Aharon Shalom and Mayer. Whatever we learn, whatever we do, it's sending him packages up in Shemayim, presents, and that's how we stay close with him. That's how we continue fostering our bond with him. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much to Chevy for coming here tonight all the way from Muncie. And I follow Chevy on Instagram. That's the only way really I know her until tonight. And I can say that I have been inspired many times by the things that she says. And I think you all will also tonight be very inspired by her. So without further ado, okay. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so happy that, like, it's incredible how it just works out. And, you know, sometimes you just sort of, like, think something's a long shot, and you send out this message, and, like, who knows what's going to happen, and then somehow everything sort of falls into place. So it's really a plus of mine to be here. And like you said, anything that we learn and any inspiration that we gain should be really nice to your father. So this time period that we're currently living in is what's known as Shobhavim. Now, this whole concept of Shobhavim, it's actually really cute. Most people connect Shobhavim with like Hilchos Nida refresher type like curriculums, or Rav's giving a Shobhavim shir, and that's code for like a Taras Mishpacha refresher. My 11-year-old son is currently at home sulking because he can't go to the Rav's Shobhavim shir, and he doesn't understand why, and it's so unfair. And when I told him that, well, you know, it's really like more relevant for married people, he's like, well, how do you expect me to ever grow up and be married if you're not going to let me go to the Rav's Shobhavim shir, right? And there's a part of me that's like, you know, he has a point. Like, we should maybe make like a junior version to sort of ease them into it. But typically, it's something that is more, it's a time period that's more geared towards men. And a lot of women don't actually even really connect to Shobhavim or know what Shobhavim is. I first started exploring the whole concept of Shobhavim when I was teaching Moadim class. So I was going through, it was 9th grade, and I'm going through the calendar, and I get to after Hanukkah, and I look at the calendar, and I'm like, okay, I'm preparing. It's my first year teaching this class. What's next? And I'm like, thanks. Long way off until Purim. Like, what am I filling this time period with, right? And then it's like, okay, well, there's Tu B'Shvat in between, but between Hanukkah and Tu B'Shvat, like, we still have several weeks. Like, so one week I taught them, like, you know, the luach, the structure of how the calendar works. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to fill the next, 7 weeks, 6, 7 weeks. So what am I doing here? And that's when I started, really delving into this idea of Shobhavim, right? It's not this like abstract, purely halachic refresher. It actually has a tremendous amount of depth and meaning. So first of all, what does Shobhavim mean? It's the acronym of the parshas that we're currently learning now, right? Shmos, Va'era, Bo, Bashalach, Mishpatim, Yisro, Mishpatim, right? And then some people also refer to it as Shobhavim Tach, Shumatatavet, right? But these weeks, Shobhavim are an acronym for the parshas, but the word Shobhavim is actually a word, right? In modern Hebrew, wait, there's an Israeli here. In modern Hebrew, right? No, someone who lives in Israel. A Shovav is like a wild, wayward, rebellious, naughty child, but it's often a word that's used for a child, right? Like, you're being a Shovav right now. You're being wild. So Shobhavim refers to the wayward, right? In the pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, Shuvu banim Shobhavim, right? Return wayward children. So Shobhavim in and of itself has a meaning, and this call of Shobhavim, Shuvu banim Shobhavim, is a call that's supposed to sort of like structure our perspective during these times, right? The Jewish calendar is an incredible thing. We're actually supposed to live the calendar, right? You know all about calendars, right? Like, that's it, right? So we're actually supposed to like live the calendars, live the zmanim. It's not just something that like externally dictates what's happening to us. We're supposed to invest based on the energy of whatever happens to be going on, right? So we start the year with, Tishrei, and that has a whole energy to it. Before that, we obviously have Elul leading up to it. We have the Yamim Noraim, that leads into Hanukkah. Like, there's always an energy. There's always something that is structuring how we are connecting, how we are introspecting, right? And how we're trying to, form a deeper bond, really, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay? So what Meir Zilberberg says that this, Shuvu Banim Shobhavim is a call that's emanating from Shemayim, right? That, like, it's not just that, there is that pasuk in Yirmiyahu. That's really what we're supposed to be hearing at this time. Now, this whole concept of listening to the Kol Hashem actually applies to this week's Parsha that we just learned, Parsha Shmos, right? What does Moshe say to Hashem? He says, Bnei Yisrael aren't gonna, they're not gonna listen to me, right? So Paro's not gonna listen to me. Bnei Yisrael aren't gonna listen to me, right? He's kind of really, feels paralyzed
And he goes to Hashem with this complaint of, how will Paro listen if even Bnei Israel won't listen? Now, you can ask yourself, like, why do Bnei Israel have to listen to him? Only Paro has to listen to him, right? Bnei Israel don't actually have to listen. As long as Paro listens to Moshe and Paro lets them leave, so Bnei Israel will just follow. Why do Bnei Israel have to listen, right? And this like power of Bnei Israel actually heeding the call is necessary in order for Geula to take place. It's not just, if Paro listens, then he'll take the next step, and then he'll allow Bnei Israel to leave, and Bnei Israel will just go. If Bnei Israel don't first heed Kol Hashem, if they don't hear Hashem's voice and then follow through with that, then the fact that Paro is going to let them go, like, that's not going to happen, because Geula cannot happen unless Bnei Israel are listening to Hashem's voice. And this ties into just a whole general concept that really relates to Shovavim of listening to our messages, right? And it's not just like a passive hearing, but it's an active listening. Because how often do we hear things and we don't actually really internalize and we don't actually integrate them, right? So like, how many times have I said, my kids have asked me something and I'm like, right? Like, you're not listening. And lo and behold, I've just given them permission to like buy a Segway, right? Like, before you know it, like something has happened, right? So that's not the kind of listening that we're talking about. We're talking about like an active internalizing of whatever message you're hearing. And actually skip ahead a few parshios, right? We have Parshas Yisro, which is, we focus tremendously on the Asaras HaDibros in Parshas Yisro, but the parsha actually starts with the words, Vayishma Yisro, right? Yisro heard something, right? Now, if you can sort of sum up this, the experience of Matan Torah with like the phrase Nasa v'Nishma, right? If you think Matan Torah, you're thinking, what is Matan Torah? Matan Torah was when we said Nasa v'Nishma. And we tend to focus a lot on the Nasa, right? Nasa v'Nishma. We put that first. We committed to doing something before we even heard what it was. Isn't that amazing? Right? We focus like on the action part of it. We focus on the mitzvos that we committed to doing before we even knew what they were. But the Nishma, even though it comes after the Nasa, right, chronologically, is also really, really important, right? We shouldn't minimize the Nishma just because we put the Nasa first. And the fact that this entire parsha starts with the words Vayishma Yisro is really indicative of that. What did Yisro hear? Or rather, I should say, what did Yisro hear that nobody else heard? Yisro heard the same thing that everybody else heard, right? Bnei Israel left Mitzrayim. There were all of these nisim, right? There was Kriyas Yamsuf. It was some sort of amazing. The whole world heard. There was nobody in the world that did not hear the events that transpired, right? With Bnei Israel leaving Mitzrayim and now finding themselves in the Midbar. So what's the difference between Yisro and everybody else? Yisro didn't just passively hear. Yisro, right, heeded the call. There was that nishma, right, that separated it from just this passive, like, oh, did you hear the news? Did you hear what crazy thing is happening in the news today? And like, we're at that point right now where like, we can't even let it affect us. You know what I'm saying? Like, I heard, but I really wish I hadn't, right? Yisro heard and internalized and then acted upon it, right? He takes himself up, he leaves Midian, and he goes and he seeks out Bnei Israel in the Midbar. And people just imagine that. Sometimes, like, I think we read the parshios, we read the things that happen, and we don't really understand what that meant. Like, he picks himself up from Midian, and then he starts, like, roaming a desert, looking for this, like, nation that recently left, like, an entirely different country, like, without GPS. Like, that's like a really big commitment to try and seek that out. So he was clearly motivated by something, and what he was motivated by was that Kol Hashem that he, like I said, not just passively heard, but really internalized. So my hope is that any message that we hear tonight, we can actually, and I'm really speaking to myself, I always say that what I love the most about sharing words of Torah is the fact that I have to like learn them, right? And find them and seek them out. And I always really try and share things that resonate with me first. First of all, because I mean, that's the whole point for me, like selfishly, the reason I teach is so that I can keep learning. And also just as a side point, it's very hard to give over something that like you haven't internalized. That's something if you're just sort of like, the conduit for it, but you haven't gone through that personal nishma process, your audience knows. Okay, so this nishma, like we said with Yisro, was very transformational, and also just indicative of all of these parshios. We also have the whole parsha of the Eved Ivri, right? What is the whole parsha of an Eved Ivri? That this Eved stood at Har Sinai, right? Or his neshama was at Har Sinai. He heard that he's only supposed to serve Hashem, and yet he wants to be in service to another man, so another human being, right? So we pierced his ear because his ear didn't hear. The thing is, we just said he was at Har Sinai and his neshama heard. Why are you piercing his ear? Because he heard and he didn't hear, right? He was there and he heard, but it didn't integrate into who he was. He still wants to be somebody else's Eved. Now, the truth is that it's very hard to change. So it's nice that we sit here and we're like, yes, everybody integrate the ideas, right? But like, change is hard. Change is not an easy thing to do, right? And I think that a lot of times we put change on like this pedestal. Like if it's not huge, if it's not obvious, if it's not, like external, it's a huge pet peeve of mine. All of our changes have to be like obvious to everybody. We have to look in the mirror and see the change, right? Then it has no value. And that's not true. That's not the way it is at all, right? If we would consistently change in like tiny ways, right? We personally, forget everybody else, but anybody around us, but we personally would really benefit from that tremendously. But this resistance to change is what the Chazon Ish calls a Benoni B'shita, right? The person who's like, I'm just fine where I am, right? And that balance of knowing when to move forward and knowing, when it's time to change is a really, really delicate balance. And hopefully we're going to come back to that idea at the end. But our entire life is about, like I always say, if you gave me one word to sum up what we're doing here in this world, so I always say it would be like, when the genie comes to you and says like, you have one wish and your first wish is, can I have 10 more wishes, right? So if you come to me and you say like, you have one word, I'm like, can I get more words? I'm like, where do I go to get more words? But if you were really being mean and strict about it, and you said I only had one word, then the word would be connection, right? Your entire purpose in this world, your neshama's reason for being in this world is to connect. And I think actually more accurately, you can say to reconnect, right? To reconnect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the source of where you come from, to connect with other people, to connect within yourselves, right? To your own self, to form bonds between all of the different parts of you that make up you, right? It is all about connection. And how do we do that? How do we go through this process of trying to connect to ourselves and to Hashem and to everybody else around us? So the Baal Shem Tov says that everything that we experience, everything that we encounter is meant to be a mirror. It's meant to be like a reflection of what we need to work on or now again, sometimes we externalize this a lot, right? Like there's the really annoying person behind you in line at the bakery. So it must be that your task right now is to work on your patients, right? And sometimes, or whatever it might be. Sometimes we externalize it a lot, but it can be really, really tiny and really, really nuanced, right? Our lives are full of these messages, and I think sometimes we get so overwhelmed by it, like, oh, I can't pay attention to every single message, right? I can't internalize everything that's happening, so I have to just live my life, right? And I'm like, but maybe it's twice a day. Once a day, once a week even, right? We internalize the message, we would already be, probably better off. And like I said, I'm really definitely talking to myself. Okay, so why this time of year do we have Shovavim? Okay, so yes, the Parshios and these other Parshios but why now? Why specifically now? There's this lag in the calendar, as we said. And actually, this time of year is following the time when Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, right? And they began to experience the ramifications of that choice, right? They began to experience the ramifications of their actions. When we learned this in Chumash, I think many of us haven't really revisited this later on in life, so there's sort of this blur, right? Like Adam and Chava are created, okay, and then there's a fate, right? And then there's like anger from Hashem, and they're like tossed out of Gan Eden, right? And then like skip, time of hell, right? Like what happened? What actually was happening here, right? It wasn't like this instantaneous shift. So after Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, they began to see the effects of that fate. And one of the things that Adam noticed, among a lot of other things, was that the days were getting shorter. It seemed like there was less light in the world. And Adam looked at this and was convinced that it was a result of his actions. He diminished the amount of light that there was in the world. And this was Hashem pulling away from him. The days were getting shorter, the days were getting shorter. And as he's, pursuing this tshuva, right, of, the after effects of his hate, he's getting more and more nervous. Like, the days are getting shorter, the days are getting shorter, right? And then the days started getting longer again, right? And Adam breathes a sigh of relief. right? Okay, Hashem is accepting my tshuva, and that's like right around the time of Tu B'Shvat, which kind of falls halfway through this time period of Shovavim. But it's specifically at this time when Adam was pursuing reconnection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we today have the energy of tshuva. We tend to throw tshuva into like Elul. Tshuva's an Elul thing, tshuva's a Rosh Hashanah thing, right? And then hold your breath until next year when you get to do it all over again. But this time of year is actually a really auspicious time for connecting and reconnecting. Like we said, the Jewish calendar is full of these opportunities, right? It's really all about connection, actually, but there's different energies for how to do that. And I don't like to think of it as like a spectrum or a hierarchy. I like to think of it more as like a circle, right? So like in the center is what we're trying to connect to. And then the Jewish year, the calendar is sort of a circle all around it. So it's not like this is a better way and this is the less ideal way and everything sort of like is this hierarchy, which is how we tend to look at a lot of things. But it's wherever you are in the circle, you have some avenue of connection. You have some access point of where you can more deeply connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay? What exactly are we being mitaking now, right? So, okay, this is a time of tshuva, right? And something Adam and the Chet. But what exactly, whenever we talk about this idea of trying to create a tikkun for the Chet, which is basically what we're all doing all the time, right? There's a few different like principles that come up. So we know that Shabbos candles are one of them, like Nero's Shabbos are part of it. We know that marriage is a big piece of the tikkun of Adam and Chava, right? We're constantly in our marriages trying to recreate this Adam-Chava dynamic, which we know is like the original ideal way of men and women connecting. So I'm hoping that we can kind of like talk about this a little bit. A few things that are, known as like specifically to work on during Shovavim, aside from Shalom Bayis, are things like eating, foods that aren't allowed. Some people are more careful about kashrus, so they even fast during Shovavim, and just in general trying to limit your physical pleasures for their own sake. And that's a really important caveat. Whenever we say things like limit physical pleasures, we always think like, oh, okay, yes. We love this idea as much as we hate it. We love this idea of like austerity, right? Because it feels very safe. It feels very safe if I tell you limit your, physical pleasures in this world, right? If I tell you no, you can have like full range of whatever pleasures exist in this world, but they have to be l'shem shamayim, or they have to in some way bring you closer to Hashem and His creations. Like that's scarier because what if I get it wrong? I'd much rather just not. I'd much rather just say like, oh, Shovavim fasting, right? I'll just inhibit, right, my own natural inclination to enjoy things. But that's not actually what we're supposed to do, and specifically in this time of Shovavim. So yes, we're supposed to limit our physical pleasures for physical pleasure's sake, right? We're supposed to experience those pleasures for potentially a higher purpose. Okay, so I want to put that aside for a little bit, and then move on to another point. And hopefully at the end, all of the points sort of like come together in this like, beautiful, maybe not so beautiful, so it's a little messy, but they all usually come together at the end. Okay, so in Shir HaShirim, there are 4 relationships, specifically, relationships that women embody that describe the connection that Bnei Yisrael and Hashem can experience, right? The intimacy specifically that Bnei Yisrael and Hashem can experience. And they are Imi, right? Bnei Yisrael are referred to as Imi, my mother, Achosi, my sister, Biti, my daughter, and Rayasi, my wife, okay? And these are all of the different like relationships and personas rather that we're all sort of like moving in and out of, right? If you describe me, what are you? Well, right, I'm somebody's sister, I'm somebody's daughter, I'm somebody's mother, I'm somebody's wife, right? All of these things make up me. And then of course, we're always very quick to add, because it's 2021, and I'm also my own self, right? And that's not wrong, by the way, that is a very good thing. But my own self is definitely very much influenced by being somebody's daughter and mother and wife and sister. I cannot escape that, okay? So I want to just for a minute talk about this, just because I can't go into all of them, and my favorite one is this descriptor of Imi, mother, okay? So aim, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons I like it so much, is that the energy of aim, of motherhood, is not an energy that only mothers channel. is an energy that every single Jewish woman has the capacity to channel. And I wish that we kind of said those things like louder, like for the people in the back to hear. Like, this is an energy for all Jewish women. This is a koach of all Jewish women, whether you currently have a child or not, whether you biologically have children or not. This is an energy that is available to you, and not only available to you, it's an energy that you have a responsibility to disseminate. So what is the energy of aim? So if you take the word itself, aim, it's made up of two letters, aleph and mem, okay? And now I want to break that down further. If you think of an aleph, we're not doing script letters now, we're doing print letters. So an aleph is made up of a vav, a yud, and a yud. Do you see it? An aleph, a yud, and a yud, okay? So a vav, a yud, and a yud. What's the gematria in total of vav and yud and yud? 26, okay? 26, we know what, when you hear the number 26, what do you think? Shem Hashem, right? Yod Kei Vav Kei. This is the embodiment of Hashem. Yes, it's somehow embodied in the letter Aleph. And Aleph is the first letter of the Aleph phase, right? Because like, this is the beginning of everything. When you say, when I hear people say like, Emunah and Bitachon are the Aleph phase of a Yid, right? I'm like, but literally, because Aleph, is representative of Emunah, and obviously Aim and Emunah are very much connected. But the knowledge that Hashem is the beginning of everything, is the source of everything, that our lives are, determined by His will, that is accompanied, that is like, portrayed in the letter Aleph. It's a lot for one letter, but that's how alphabets work, okay? What about a mem? So there's a lot to say about mem. It's like my favorite letter. But mem, what? I decided, yeah. But I always say, like, you're a special kind of nerd if you have a favorite letter of the alphabet, but it's okay, I own it, right? So I want to think that one of the reasons mem is my favorite, mem is 40, right? And the number 40 is very indicative of anything transformational is connected to 40. 40 years in the Midbar, Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai for 40 years. The minimum amount of water in a mikvah is 40 seah. When you see transformation, rebirth, something like from what it was into something entirely new, you will see 40, okay? It's also, it's the connector, right? It's the connector letter because it's the middle letter of the aleph base. It's what connects the beginning of the aleph base to the end of the aleph base, right? So mem embodies connection and transformation, right? And aleph represents emunah and that foundation. So the word aim is those two concepts together. Women have the capacity and the responsibility to connect those around them and themselves with the principle that's embodied in the letter Aleph, which is emunah, right? And I'm using the word emunah just so that I don't have to say all over again, right? The principle that Hashem is the source of everything, and everything that we imagine when we say everything that we connect to when we say the word emunah, right? That is what women are disseminating to those around them. So that's just kind of, one of the energies that I wanted to touch on of all of these. That women connect the people around them to the knowledge that Hashem is the creator of the universe. And it sounds like a really simple thing, but it's really incredibly deep, right? Because it's not just like logistical, men go to work, so women stay home with the kids, and they're singing songs about Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is everywhere, so therefore women are the ones who, teach their kids about, I feel like sometimes what happens in our life is that incredibly deep concepts get boiled down to the lowest common denominator, and that's kind of what we connect to. We connect to the most externalized version of a very deep concept. But if we dig a little bit more, I think that sometimes we'll actually find ourselves connecting more deeply to our role, right? And I don't mean that, by the way, in a flippant way, because I'm the first one to say that I'm not a get on the floor and play with your kids kind of gal. It's not me. And don't worry, I wrestle with plenty of guilt for that. I went to Date Apple for many years. I also, you know what I'm saying? I also kind of struggle with that. Oh, this is how I'm supposed to connect. Until I realized that I have the energy regardless, right? That's I have this power, and it's up to me to figure out the way to disseminate it in a way that really resonates with who I am. Hashem didn't give me, right, all of my traits and all of my kochos and all of my everything so that I could just shove it into a closet until my kids are grown up. That's not what's supposed to happen. deny who I am in order to like raise my children or focus on my family if that, let's say, doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. I'm supposed to figure out a way to integrate those two things, right? And not have to choose one over the other. Okay. Putting that aside first, well, actually not putting that aside for a second, going more deeply into that. This idea of a woman and her different kofos and how she's described in Shir HaShirim. A woman is compared to a bias. And actually, it's not fair to say compared to. A woman, and this is seen kind of like throughout, you know, different sources. A woman is I want to come up with like a really good word, but I'm just left with like simpler words. Fine. So we'll try and explain the concept of maybe something like, you know, like a bigger adjective will come to me. What is this idea of a woman being not just compared to a bias, a home, but like what are we expressing about women by saying that they are home? Okay. Now, we're not saying that women should be home. That's not what we're talking about today. And we're not saying even that women, you know, have a tremendous power in influencing their home. That's also not what I'm talking about today. I want to delve into what is a home and how does that actually connect to women. So anytime you see the word bias, you are always going to see it as an avenue of, hello, how are you? You are always going to see it as an avenue of connection, okay? A bias is a place where some form of deep connection takes place, yes? And we see this going back to the very beginning. Avraham Avinu referred to the Beis HaMikdash, or the place where the Beis HaMikdash was going to be built, as Har, right? Yitzchak referred to the place where the Beis HaMikdash was going to be built as a Sadeh. And Yaakov referred to it as a bias. Okay, that's the first time we see this word. Yaakov referring to Har HaMoriah, the place where the Beis HaMikdash was going to be built, as a bias. And that's the word that we use until today, right? We say, we refer to the Beis HaMikdash. We refer to where do we daven? We're in general, where does communal connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu take place? In the Beis Knesset, right? And then of course there's also what we bless every young couple, right? You should build a bayis ne'eman b'Yisrael, right? So there's something about this word. Why don't we tell them you should have a mishpacha? Right? Why don't we wish them like, you know, like hatzlacha on your zivug, right? On your part. Why the word bias, right? Because there's some energy in this word bias that we want them to take with them and that we can connect to in any of these places. So Schlanger sums it up like this. I think these words are so beautiful, I'm going to say them twice, okay? Maybe even 3 times, we'll see. But Schlanger says that bias is representative of the ability for human beings to actualize spiritual qualities in a physical world. Right, you need me to say it again? Okay, because I need to hear it again, right? Bias is the ability for human beings to actualize spiritual qualities in a physical world. Bias is where the abstract becomes concrete. Right? It's where all of the inspiration and all of the fluff, and I like fluff as much as anyone else, it's warm and cozy, right? But it's where it becomes real, right? It's where it goes from abstract to tangible. That takes place in the bias, okay? Next piece, and it's really also a continuation. We know, right, that a child born to a Jewish mother is Jewish. Right? That whether or not a child is Jewish or not is based on whether or not it comes from the womb of a Jewish woman. Now, this is not only logistical, although that's definitely beneficial. You know definitively that if the mother is Jewish and her child is Jewish, that the child came from the mother. So that's how we can determine that there's no break in the chain, that this child was actually born from a Jewish mother. So that's how it embodies. And it's a good plan, right? Because like that, you know for sure, who did this child come from, right? But there's another piece to it also. It's not just the technicality, okay? And this connects to the woman being, I hate using the word compared to because she is the bias. So the woman being the bias, okay? And that is the fact that when a child, right, is developing in its mother's womb, that womb is this child's base medrash, okay? And again, there's that word bias because what are we doing in a base medrash, right? We're tangibly connecting to the words of Hashem through Limud Torah, okay? So this, the malach that comes down and teaches the child Torah, right, in the womb of its mother, it's not like, again, well, it makes sense. This is where the child is, so I'll come to you because, you're a little stuck where you are right now, right? Like, you can't come to me, right? And I'm not going to wait until afterwards because, you're not busy doing anything else, so now's a good time for me to teach you all the Torah. Like, it's not just like, oh, it's a logistical convenience. It's deliberate that this is taking place inside of the mother as the child is growing physically. The child is also growing spiritually, and there's no difference between a male fetus and a female fetus. We're all learning Torah, right? And it's this place is the epicenter of transmission, right? This is where everything this child is going to need for its future connection, right, is happening right here in this place, in the base medrash of the woman, which is technically her womb. Okay, Rav Yossi in the Gemara says again that a woman is compared to a woman is a bias, right? Like that he referred to his wife as Basi, my home. And actually, my husband on the way here reminded me that Hasidim often refer to their wife as Steve, right? Like, you're my house. Yeah, like that's not like because that's where I want you to go. It's because that's who you are. You are my home, right? And again, sometimes I think we don't always like connect to these ideas. I wonder if we should like survey Hasidic men and say, do you know why you call your wife Steve? Right? And I'm curious, but like with a lot of things, we have like the practice without necessarily, right? I know some of us are struggling to connect with to ourselves as a house, right? But like on that big ass, right? Right? Well, that should be your permission, like we need a solid foundation. Like I before, you have to be built on something like concrete and real, like right? And imagine trying to build something like on celery. It's very expensive, it's like you need something more solid. If you needed permission, I'm giving it to you, right? Right, exactly. 100%. So what is a house? What is a house? If you had to explain to me what a house is, how would you describe it? Yeah, oh good. Okay, good. No, I like that answer. But also a more technical answer is 4 walls, a door, it has a foundation, a roof over its head. Exactly. Okay. So what's representative in this structure? Okay. So I want to offer, protection. Yes, beautiful. Okay. So I want to offer 3 components of protection, okay, that we see in this physical structure of, 4 walls, a roof, etc. The first one is that a house creates an interior area that separates it from the outside. It's protection kind of like we're not even up to protection yet. First, it's just like a separation. This is inside the house, that's outside the house, right? So we already just have that boundary. There's already that kind of distinction, okay? Another thing that a house does, and this I don't know that I'm going to be able to get into this. I think we might run out of time, but I want to also kind of compare it to 3 different mitzvot, but we'll see if we get there. Okay. The second thing is that this boundary of walls separates the people who live inside the house from the people who live outside of the house. So it doesn't only just make a distinction in terms of space, right? That this is outside and this is inside, but it also distinguishes between the inhabitants, right? Everybody who lives in this house is part of our family. Even if you're just boarding here and we just sort of like adopted you, right? You're not biologically, but you're part of our family because you live in this house, right? You're not going to invite a stranger to live in your house. And even if you do invite a stranger to live in your house, before long, they're going to be part of your family because they're living in your house, right? There's something about all of these people occupying the same space that creates a bond between all of them, right? And I couldn't remember where I heard this from. I think it might be from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I think, but I couldn't remember exactly, that the whole, and I think it's based on a Rav Hirsch around Hanukkah, but that it's important, when you talk about Shalom Bayis, it's not just a relationship that exists between a husband and a wife. Shalom Bayis means that every member of this family exists in harmony with one another, right? That every member of this family contributes to what makes us a family. right? Your energy is a contribution, right? Your like annoyances, right? The things that aggravate me about you, and also, the positivity that you bring, and all of you, all interacting with each other, create this like harmony, right? When we say shalom, by the way, and this I could give like a whole separate cheer just on this, a lot of times we think peace. And we think peace because that's like the English translation for shalom. But we imagine sort of like everything calm, like nobody, no feathers ruffled, like just shalom, bayis, we never fight, right? That's not actually what shalom means, okay? Shalom is an expression of unity. And you cannot take two identical things, put them together, and call it unity. That's just an expansion of one thing. If I have a bottle of milk and it's half empty, I just revealed what type of person I am. But one's half empty and one's half full. Okay, fine, I'm back on track, right? And you have two bottles of milk, and there's only some milk in them. And I combine them into one because I want to save space in my fridge. I have not created unity between my milk bottles. I've just put more milk in a bottle, right? But if I have milk, and then I add like chocolate syrup, which is a totally different thing, right? And then I shake the whole thing up, and like the poor milk and the whole chocolate, like they're screaming, like, what are you doing to us, right? But then I'm like, oh, look what I've created, something entirely new and better. And we can all agree that chocolate milk is way better than regular milk, right? Now that's something that we often resist, right? So I'm gonna really like beat this mushel until it's dead. But you can imagine that the milk is like, what are you pouring into me? Like, no, I don't want that. I'm very happy as I am, right? And the chocolate syrup that's being like squeezed out of that bottle into the milk is like, I don't want to go down this narrow bottleneck into this like white. I want to stay where I am, right? And I'm like, no, you'll see, it'll be good, right? But in the process, it can be like a pretty unpleasant experience. But that's unity. That's unity, right? And it's a little chaotic. The process of getting to that place of shalom is not easy, right? It's not simple. There's a lot of mess, and there's a lot of even chaos, and there's a lot of like upheaval that goes into creating shalom. So when we talk about shalom bayis and all of the people living in one home, that's not necessarily like when you come into this house, everything is super peaceful. It means that everyone has a place. It means that everyone who's a member of this family is somehow expressed in the dynamic of what makes us a family. Okay, so that's number two, that the walls bring everybody in the household together. And the third, like you said, is that it serves as a protective force from the elements outside that could potentially threaten what's happening inside. And once that house is like safe and secure, right, that's when it's okay to open a window and let what's inside the house shine outside. Right? That's when, like, when you have that stable foundation, that's when you're not worried that everything's going to kind of be rocked. Okay? So those are just like a few, 3 ways that we can imagine the physical structure of a house being representative of what a woman is expressing. And I always say, whenever we talk, this is again a separate piece, but whenever we talk about male and female, when we talk about those energies, masculine energy and feminine energy, we're not talking about men and women. Because men and women both are like a combination of male and female energies. There is male energy within a woman, and there's female energy within a man in terms of what they mean, as far as like Kabbalistic principles. I like to say that men are the spokesmen for masculine energy, and women are the spokeswomen of feminine energy. So yes, we are made up of both, and we utilize both, but what are we representing in this world is primarily the masculine or the feminine energy. But it's not that you are only just that thing. And you can also, this is just another idea I want to throw out quickly, is that this word of bayis, the bays, the yud, and the saf is also indicative of this principle. The bays being bina, right? That like intuition that a woman has. The yud being a letter, yud in and of itself is a letter of holiness. Okay, and also interestingly, yud is the letter that encompasses all of the integers. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Ches, Tes, right? 1 through 9 is encompassed in yud. It's like it's the unifier of all of the integer numbers in yud. And saf, this is why I wasn't sure I wanted to bring up this idea, because this could be a whole separate thing. Also, saf is in Torah seen as like a sign, right? Like an oath, a stamp of approval to a certain extent. The Jewish home's influence, right? Not just in your own personal world, but in the entire world. And that kind of is summed up in this word bias. Now, getting back to Shovavim, I'm keeping my eye on the time, okay? So Rav Wolfson says that Shovavim, the key aspect of Shovavim isn't that we're reading the Parshios, right? It's that we're actually reliving the Parshios. We're actually, as we go through them, they are like happening to us. We are re-experiencing them, okay? So what's happening in these Parshios? We have slavery, right? We have galus. That's how we start off, right? We have like a tremendous nisayon. We have suffering. Okay, we're familiar with that, right? And as we transition through our suffering, we reach a place of geula, right? That geula isn't in and of itself the end. The geula has a greater purpose, which is matan Torah, right? So all of this is happening throughout these parshios. What is the ultimate geula? Says Rav Wolfson, right? Kisod Eloka al. I'm not even going to go into it because I think I don't have time. Okay, what is the ultimate geula? Says Rav Wolfson, it's Hashem residing in your home. It's creating an edifice, physical and spiritual, where Hashem can be channeled through, right? That's essentially what the Beis HaMikdash is. And it's just interesting, like as a side note, if you think about all of the times that Hashem communicated his like bris with Bnei Yisrael, right? It's always about Eretz Yisrael. Have you ever noticed that, right? You have bris beinat besarim between Hashem and Avraham Avinu, and Hashem says, right, I'm gonna, multiply you. There's gonna be so many people that come to me, and I promise you Eretz Yisrael. And then Yitzchak again, I promise you Eretz Yisrael. And then Avram, and then Yaakov again, I promise you I'm gonna take you to Eretz Yisrael, right? And with Moshe again, right? I'm gonna take you out of Mitzrayim, and you're gonna lead them through the Midbar, and they're gonna go to Eretz Yisrael. What is this obsession with Eretz Yisrael? Like, what about Torah? What about mitzvot? Right? What is this obsession with Eretz Yisrael? We see all of it, we're connecting with Hashem, not in Eretz Yisrael, right? So Eretz Yisrael and being there was not in and of itself the destination. It was a destination for the purpose of building the Mishkan, building the Beis HaMikdash. Hashem having that place that he can connect to all of us through, right? So the Geula, the going to Eretz Yisrael, was not for its own purpose. It was for a purpose of greater connection. It was about having that place to build the Beis HaMikdash, and that's actually from Rav Pincus, right? Because that's the bias where we ultimately connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay. One final piece to so going back to this idea of these parshios, right? You can actually, I think it's always like whenever I notice these things, or whenever like I see these things outlined in my preparation, it's almost like it takes my breath away how everything like so perfectly like ends up kind of fitting together in different pieces. So the Nesivos Shalom says that these parshios of Shovavim, right, are 6 parshios times 7 days of the week equal 42, right? And 42, also referred to in these parshios, are the 42 masaos, the 42 encampments of, that Bnei Yisrael stopped in along the way. That, like, if you want to kind of sum up, and this is actually very interesting. I wonder if there's even like a specific book on this, because it would be so amazing. But if you go through the 42 masaos, you will find everything that you need to know about navigating any nisayon in your life. It's all in those parshios of their like traveling through the midbar. It's really quite incredible. And actually, the Nesivos Shalom says that a person will experience in his life 42 transformational events. I haven't counted. I don't know, and I don't know how. And then, of course, by the way, if you get to the end of your life and you're off, then we're like, well, how do you define transformational events, right? Maybe something that happened to you that you didn't think it was transformational actually was, and vice versa, right? But that's what he says. When a person goes through 42 transformational events in their life, they actually relive this experience of going through the midbar. I'm curious. I almost want to that's going to be one of my questions. Like, can you show me the 42? Like, I wonder if I was paying attention, right? Which goes back to what we said about Nishma. Are we actually paying attention to those messages and absorbing them and using them to influence our actions and determine our choices? Okay. So when you think about this concept of Bnei Yisrael traveling through the midbar and the 42 masaos, right? It can be summed up in the words that are repeated constantly throughout this. Al pi Hashem yachadu, al pi Hashem yisahu, right? that, and back and forth, Al Pi Hashem Yisrael, Al Pi Hashem Yachanu, right? That Bnei Yisrael, according to the word of Hashem, traveled, and according to the word of Hashem, they stopped. And as you go through these parshios and you learn through all the masalos, that's what happens every time, right? They stopped, they started, they stopped, they traveled, and they camped, and it was always Al Pi Hashem. So if we're repeating this over and over and over again, there's something in these words that can signal to us how we're supposed to kind of, travel our lives if we're experiencing all these 42 transformational events, which apparently we are, okay? So the first one is that the Yachanu, which is sometimes very overlooked, is really important. I think that, I feel for myself actually, that we're very propelled by the Yisa'u, right? Constantly have to be moving. You constantly have to be moving. You constantly have to be growing. And it's true. It's true. I'm not disputing the trying to walk up a down escalator, right? Like that muscle is very ingrained into me, right? You have to constantly be moving. If you're not moving, you're going down, right? That's something that but at the same time, the Vayachanu is actually a part of the Yisa'u. It's part of the Nesiya. It's part of the journey. You cannot just go and go and go and go and go without stopping, without camping, without having the Vayachanu. Because Vayachanu is where the integration happens, right? That's where the processing happens. And we know this, right? We go, and we're like, oh, we'll process it later, right? We'll deal with it later. We'll let it hit us later. If you don't carve out that time, right, then all of the changing is going to be just externalized. It's not actually going to be integrated into who you are, right? So the Vayachanu is a really crucial component of traveling through life. I think sometimes we're very afraid of these plateaus. Oh no, if I'm not moving, am I going down? I think I'm going down. I feel like I'm okay. I feel like I'm the same, but maybe I am because I have to keep moving forward, right? And we don't really invest enough time into that Vayachanu into that like camping, which is necessary for integration. And the second thing that's really important is that we have to recognize that it's all Al Pi Hashem, right? Al Pi Hashem Yisa'u, Al Pi Hashem Yachanu. It's not like on our own, right? We're like, oh, now's a good time to go. Now's a good time to camp. We have to really be aware of those messages, kind of going back to how we started of that, right, that nishma, that power of heeding the call. Now, I happen to love Rabbi Fran's book, Listen to Your Messages. I feel like it's an oldie at this point, but it's really a classic. And I think, I get this question a lot from my students. They're in 12th grade. And these are the questions that I guess 12th graders ask. I can't remember, right? But they're always very concerned with, whether messages are actually messages, whether something's not a message, it's just a thing that they should ignore, right? It feels very overwhelming. And one of the things that I always say and then attempt to calm them down, but also I think it's really true, is that your intent is very important and very influential. And if your ear is like attuned to hearing Hashem's messages, meaning that you desire to identify and integrate Hashem's messages, it's somehow a little easier. And that's not like foolproof at all, because all of us get, like distracted at times. But if we fundamentally somehow at our core desire to be able to hear, the Kol Hashem when we hear it, it's somehow easier to see it when it's right in front of us. And I'm sure, I can think of many of my own examples, but I'm sure all of you can think of times where you saw Yad Hashem, but it also was so easy, it would have been so easy to like overlook Yad Hashem. I'll give you a silly example that happened recently. I was meeting a friend of mine in the city, okay? So it wasn't so recently. Remember those days? Okay? I was meeting a friend of mine in the city. And I was coming from Muncie, and I was meeting her in the city, and she calls me literally as I was like about to head out, and she said, "Are you still in Muncie?" And I said, "Yeah, I happen to still be here. I just dropped my son off at school. He had an appointment that morning. I dropped him off at school, and from there I was heading out." She's like, "I know it's like way across town, but my mother-in-law, who was here, she was visiting from overseas, had been in Muncie at her sister and had gone to Manhattan to my friend that morning, but she left her bag with like all of her passport, her documents, like everything that she needed, she left it in Muncie." She's like, "Is there any way that like you'd be able to do that?" I'm like, "You're not gonna believe it. I'm literally like a minute from your aunt's house," right? Because I wasn't coming from home. I was coming from dropping my son off at school, and it happened to, and so I'm like, no problem. She's like, no, you can't imagine what a huge like help this is to me. And I'm like, no, it's really no big deal. And just by the way, as a side note, my father-in-law, when I first got married, so I married into a family of like big balei chesed. It's extremely intimidating. And my father-in-law especially is like a really like under the radar, under the table baal chesed. Like nobody, like, people will stop my mother-in-law on the street and tell her, your husband this, that, and she's like, if you say so, like, I have no idea, right? So one of those families. And of course, like, I'm very intimidated because, like, I don't know, like, I like being helpful, but also, like, it's a bother. Like, it's hard, And I remember I was married probably about 6 months, okay? My mother-in-law, my in-laws live in Eretz Yisrael. My mother-in-law was in America for an extended amount of time, and every Shabbos we lived in Eretz Yisrael, we would go to my father-in-law for Shalosh Shabbos. My father-in-law was so grateful. And we're telling him, like, but it's really no big deal. Like, we're this young, like, we just got married, right? Like, I don't have my sisters-in-law, my husband's the youngest. My sisters-in-law all have, like, a bunch of little kids at home. I'm like, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal. And he's like, it's such a chesed, it's such a chesed. And I was like, Abba, it's so interesting that you're saying it's such a chesed because, like, one of the things that really intimidates me about your family, yes, I do say this to my father-in-law, one of the things that really intimidates me about your family is how much chesed everybody does. And, like, here you are, you're telling me it's such a chesed. Like, are you just being nice to me? Like, to make me feel better about the fact that you're these big balei chesed and, like, I'm just me? And he said, I give you a bracha. At first, he reassured me, no, it's like really, I appreciate it so much, okay? And then he's like, I give you a bracha that you should have opportunities to do chesed that are like no big deal for you, but like a huge deal to the person that you're helping, okay? It's an amazing bracha. I give it all to you. If I have a koach, right, I give it all to you. It's an amazing bracha. And I have seen it like over and over and over again. It happens all the time. And this was one example of that. Like, I'm literally minutes from your house. Like, it's no big deal. Like, it's so easy. Not a big deal. She's like effusive in her gratitude. Thank you so much, thank you so much, thank you so much, right? That's the kind of thing that, like, if I would reflect on that a little bit more, like, why was I meeting her that day? The truth is, we really were supposed to meet like 2 weeks before, and something happened and it didn't work out, which was like super annoying at the time, right? And then was my son's appointment actually like supposed to be that morning, or was it like, I can't even remember now at this point, was it, chances are, just to make the story more exciting, it actually wasn't supposed to be that day, right? Or whatever else. So it's really easy to disregard all of these Kol Hashem moments that propel your Vayachanu and that propel your Vayisau, right? But if you just have the desire to identify them, somehow you're able to to hear them a little bit more. And I just want to end with a final thought that hopefully brings us all together. So going back to Adam HaRishon, right? Because that's kind of where we started with this whole Shovavim idea of why are we here now and this tikkun of the chait of Adam and Chava, right? So when Adam was naming all of creation, right? We know that he was giving names that were representative of the essence of creation, right? So any name that he gave to a specific species wasn't just a, you know what sounds cute? Dog. Like, yeah, that's exactly, dog. I think people are gonna like that. I think, that's the sound that it evokes man's best friend, right? Like, that's not what it was, right? There's something about the word kelev, and this is, a power of Lashon HaKodesh, that is indicative of, right, the essence of a dog, okay? And then Adam names himself. And he names himself Adam. Why? Because he comes from the Adama, right? Okay, that makes sense. But that's the essence of man? Like, we're a clump of earth? I'm a little offended, like that's my essence. Okay, I understand how it makes sense that was the inspiration because we come from earth, but like, I don't want that to be my essence, that I'm earth, right? And the Alter Sabbatka says that's exactly the essence of man. The essence of man is that it is the impetus for growth, right? You take a seed and you plant it in earth and the seed grows, right? But a seed won't grow somewhere else. A seed needs earth to grow, right? You take an idea, you take inspiration, you take Torah, right? You put it into a person, right? And that enables growth. That enables, right? That enables connection. This is something that I often tell my students also. I wasn't sure if I was going to say it or not, but I have like 3 minutes, so I'm going to share it. It's one of my favorite things to share. I think a lot of times we, again, this kind of speaks to that externalization of growth, but we look at ourselves, right? We kind of turn inward and we're like, grow, change, right? Whatever, either it's like, listen to your messages, grow, why aren't you being, we're very harsh with ourselves, right? And we often talk to ourselves in a very like negative, berating voice. And this is something that like, you know, I don't love. It's not inspiring, okay, to be like yelled at, even by your own son, okay? It's really not. And I encourage you all to be a little bit like more gentle and kind. It's not lazy. It's not lazy to be like, it's okay, you tried your best, better luck next time. Somehow we think that that's like a cop-out. Like, who thinks so nice to yourself? Don't you know what you just did? Like, it's not helpful in the long term to talk to yourself that way. But I'll tell you why else it's not really helpful. Because it doesn't acknowledge the fact that we are conditioned to grow. We are designed to grow. We are, right, like our entire Bria is this like magnetic force back to where we came from, back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? That reconnection that we sort of started out talking about, like that's who we are. So we don't actually need to berate ourselves or to yell ourselves or to force ourselves to grow, right? What we actually need to do is remove the impediments to our growth, right? What we actually need to do is put ourselves in an environment to the best of our ability, and some of this we have control over this, and some of this we have less control over. But what we actually want to do is just remove the obstacles to growth, right? Kind of weed the garden, right? And Rav Wolban, Zrio B'nam B'Chinuch, his classic Chinuch sefer, planting and building in Chinuch, he has three principles of Chinuch, right? Zriya, Binyan, Tefillah, right? There's planting, there's building, and there's Tefillah. And Zriya, planting, is kind of the long-term investment in Chinuch. Binyan is the more kind of like shorter term, like, okay, how do you deal day to day? And tefillah is obviously dealing, right? So what does he say Zriya, this planting, is, right? When you look at a child, right? You think of the child as a plant, right? So if you plant a seed, right, in fertile soil, let's say, or let's say not, you plant a seed in any kind of soil, and the plant isn't growing. You're gonna go over to the plant and be like, what's wrong with you? Why are you not growing, right? Are you gonna like schlep the plant and be like, if you're not going to grow, I'm going to tug you, right? I'm gonna like force you to grow like that. You're just going to rip the whole plant out. That's not actually going to. What are you going to? If you have a plant, right? Or in my case, it's orchids. Orchids and I cannot be trusted. They're very fickle. Apparently, it's not my fault. I did some Googling, okay? But any kind of plant, I'm terrible. Just give me fake ones, right? But let's say I were inclined to invest in my plant caretaking, right? So I look at the plant's not thriving. What I start looking at, is there enough sunlight? Am I overwatering? Am I underwatering? Is this the right soil? Maybe I need to add a vitamin to the soil, right? Like, we recognize that it's not really the plant. Because if all of the circumstances around the plant were what they're supposed to be, the plant would grow. Why would because plants are created to grow. If everything around them is conducive to growth, they will grow. You don't have to actually do anything to the plant to force it to grow. You know, plants, you're very hard to inspire. Very lazy plant, right? Like, what's wrong with you, plant, that you're not actually growing? Like, it's not the plant, it's everything around the plant. And I really wish that we would do this more with ourselves, right? Remember that Adam, compared to the Adama, right, we're ripe for growing. That's who we are essentially. What we really need to do if we're motivated to grow isn't like to speak harshly to ourselves, or to, you know, or think negatively about ourselves. We need more water. We need more sunlight. All of us are going to Florida, right? Like, we just need, I mean, maybe not right now. I don't know if you're crazy about Florida. But we need the circumstances around us. And to kind of bring this all home, we have the power, right, to make the circumstances of the people around us one where they can flourish. That is the feminine koach as the aim, right? As the connector, the transformer, allowing all the people around her to really relate to the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is actually feminine energy at its core, right? Allowing everyone around you, creating the space, creating the environment that everyone around you could just flourish and become their best selves, including your own self. I'm not a big fan of like spoon feeding takeaways. I actually just told this to my students, and it makes it very awkward, by the way, when you finish the speech, because you're so used to being like, and then I give you like your homework, right? So I actually was just sharing this with my 12th graders this week. We were talking about fostering your own intuition, right? Developing your own intuition, which is apparently something that not a lot of teachers talk about, right? And I understand why, because it's a lot easier in a way to just be like, this should be your Kabbalah, and like, this is what you should work on, and may I suggest, right? Everybody's like being all like, may I suggest? And I'm like, no, maybe not, right? And I'll tell you why I'm not a big fan of it. Not only because I have no idea. I have no idea, and I'm not, you know, like, haughty enough to assume, right? I don't have like, I have chutzpah, but not that much chutzpah, to assume that I know what each person independently needs to work on. But more than that is, I feel like when we do that, we steal an opportunity to go through this integration process, which we literally just spent an hour talking about, right? If I'm gonna give you the takeaway, then I've completely robbed you of that experience. And that journey, it's not just about the end result, but that process of the contemplation and the integration and the, like, you know, the just sort of like reflecting, that's a huge piece of the journey. I would venture to say even a bigger piece than what you actually end up walking away with, right? So that's my, even though it makes it awkward at the end, and I'm just like, I'm done, right? That's my reason for it, because I wouldn't want anybody to, you know, rob me of that opportunity, and I don't want to do it for you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. Does anyone have questions or comments? You're very quiet. I'm going to assume that it's because you're like, stop it. Don't tell me otherwise. But if you have questions or something wasn't clear or anything.
The last part that you said about chesed, I think that in general, that's how life is. When you're looking for something,
Yeah.
you'll see it.
Right.
It's like, otherwise it'll just like fly right by you.
Right.
But it's like,
That was a nice bracha.
It was a great bracha. Yes, no, I really did. In general, by the way, just a cute story about my father-in-law. My in-laws live a few doors down from where Rav Steinberg used to live. They were neighbors for many years. And my father-in-law is mashgiach in Har Sameach. And he had talmidim of his, Balei Tshuva, who were in the yeshiva for many years. And at a certain point, they went to Rav Steinberg for a bracha. And Rav Steinberg asked them, like, oh, where do you learn? They said, I learned Har Sameach. And they said, like, why are you coming to me for a bracha? Go to Rav Steinberg for a bracha. So that's actually, so, you know, like, he really is if you ever have the opportunity, if you ever bump into him in the street, he won't look at you, but he'll give you a bracha. And they're good ones. So I highly recommend it. But also, like, you know, yeah. So maybe that's the word. But maybe that's the word, not to yell so much. Good job.
Only because that's like the motto of our family.
No, after the disaster. I'm sure it could have been worse. Can I tell you something interesting that happens to me? I've actually never told the story before. Is the screen on? Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you the story. So I actually, a couple of years ago, this was like an incident that I, for a couple of years afterwards, I felt terrible about. Okay, so it's incredibly embarrassing, and it was very embarrassing for me to reflect on. But basically, what happened was I was in my house with, you know, my younger kids, and I don't even remember exactly what happened. Something very, very frustrating. Okay, and in my frustration, I kicked a wall. Okay, the screen's off, right? Okay. I kicked a wall. Thank you. Your eyebrows went up as they should. It's pretty crazy. I kicked the wall, and there was a hole. I kicked a hole in the wall. The wall probably wasn't very strong. Okay, we're not even there yet. I was okay. My house is plenty. It wouldn't make sense. You know what?
I can't hear her now.
I was walking around being like, what is wrong with me? Who kicks holes in walls at the age of 35? Like, who does that? What is wrong with you? What is wrong? And I'm grateful that it was in a place in my house where a lot of people don't see. It's like when So just recently, I was telling the story to somebody, and I'm like, I couldn't even get the words out. And they said, well, you know, I think that if the circumstances would have been different, it was like, because you were sitting in that way with like your feet propped up on this wall and the whole everything. And like you said, the wall couldn't have been a very strong wall. Like, I really think that if even one element of those circumstances had been different, like your wall would be intact. And it was like, I can't tell the story that way, because the way I'm telling the story is I'm so terrible. What is wrong with me? I kicked a wall. Okay. Let me just say that this is an expression of growth. And I am here now to tell you that I kicked the wall and it's okay. Okay, because I don't think 6 months ago, I'm not recommending, I mean, it was definitely like a certain, like, you know, like stress relief. We completed that stress cycle by like kicking the wall. But like for the longest time, the story that I told myself about my behavior was like, I can't, I'm out of control. I was like, what is that? Right? And it was like this person saying to me, but do you think if you would have been sitting differently, like you would have just like gone like, ugh. Right. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. It wouldn't be a big deal. Right? It was like, it was some sort of external circumstance, but I'm walking around telling myself this terrible story about how I'm so out of control and I can't rein in my anger and I can't this and I can't that because I made a hole in my wall. The screen is off, right?
You stopped it, right?
Okay, you'll edit it out. This is a